Hey there, all you slippers and sliders. Welcome to the official kickoff of WATERPARK Madness here on GL. There's gonna be all kinds of live streams, giveaways, and the ultimate water slide showdown. So keep it here all month long and enjoy the video. I can easily say that It's Such a Beautiful Day is one of my very favorite movies, and certainly one of my favorite pieces of animation. But what's even more amazing is that I've been saying that since I saw the movie for the first time 8 years ago. And just to give some context, my favorite movies and books and shows and music tend to change pretty often. I think that's natural. It's not that I end up thinking less of my old favorites, but I do tend to find a lot of other interesting work as time goes on. And on top of it all, I change over time, which adjusts how I view different pieces of art. But this movie, which technically isn't a movie, we'll get to that soon, has stayed near the top of my list for quite a long time, and since I haven't seen a lot of video essays on this one, I figured it's about time I talked about it. After all, one of my favorite things to do with this channel is to try to bring more attention to work that has fallen through the seams for one reason or another. And that's not to say that It's Such a Beautiful Day is obscure by any means. Animator Don Hertzfeldt definitely has a dedicated fan base, especially among film kids and the highbrow film community. As an example, he's apparently buddies with Richard Linklater, so that kind of gives you an idea of the sort of people that he tends to attract. But I would love to introduce this brilliant art object to folks who haven't come across it before, and beyond that, I just want to tell you why I love it and why I think it works so well. Let's start with some background, and don't worry, this will be pretty brief. Don Hertzfeldt is an animator. Apparently, he was originally just a film student who wasn't really planning on pursuing animation, but after being introduced to some basic techniques, something just clicked, and he's been releasing animated work on a semi-regular basis ever since. Some of his other shorts include Lily and Jim, The Meaning of Life, and what will probably remain his most well-known short for the rest of his career, Rejected, which is packed with early internet humor served up in bite-sized sketches laced with trace amounts of weird. More recently, he's been releasing shorts as part of a series called World of Tomorrow, which is in fact now a trilogy. I reviewed part 3 on the channel previously, so go ahead and open that one in another tab. But what we're here for is a different trilogy of short films. Short 1 in the lineup is Everything Will Be Okay, released in 2006. Short 2 is I Am So Proud of You, released in 2008. And short 3 is It's Such a Beautiful Day, released in 2011. 1 year later, in 2012, all 3 shorts, which share a singular storyline, were combined into a feature film, which was also titled It's Such a Beautiful Day, which makes things a little bit confusing. And for the rest of the review, I'll be using It's Such a Beautiful Day to refer to the feature, and then I'll refer to specific sections as parts 1, 2, and 3. For a brief and beautiful moment, It's Such a Beautiful Day was even available through Netflix, but currently it's only available physically through the Animator's website and on Vimeo, where you can pay to buy or rent the streaming version. It's Such a Beautiful Day was definitely a festival film, so it was never marketed on a wide scale, but the reviews it received at the time were more than glowing. It holds a 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, and I'd like to read a review excerpt that I scraped from the film's Wikipedia page just to give you an idea. There is a moment in each installment of Don Hertzfeldt's masterful trilogy of animated shorts where you feel something in your chest. It's an unmistakably cardiac event, the kind that great art can elicit when something profound and undeniably true is conveyed about the human condition. That's when you say to yourself, are stick figures supposed to make me feel this way? In the hands of a master, yes. And Hertzfeldt is to stick figures what Franz Liszt was to planks of ebony and ivory, and what Ted Williams was to a stick of white ash. Someone so transcendentally expert that to describe what they do in literal terms is borderline demeaning. That's definitely one of the most dramatic reviews of the movie, but it's safe to say that the few critics who gave this one a look really enjoyed it. So that's what we're dealing with here. However, another note that I think is very important for anyone who hasn't seen the movie before and so is in danger of having it overhyped for them is it's not for everyone. I personally think that the subject matter can work for just about every person currently living, but the movie's presentation might be slightly jarring for someone who doesn't often engage with experimental work. Now, to be clear, It's Such a Beautiful Day isn't really experimental when it comes to storytelling. It's mostly linear, it's easy to keep track of plot points, and it definitely has a beginning, middle, and an end. But the visuals are something different. We rarely get full frames on the screen. Instead, the visuals often consist of these little windows of either animation or live action footage or a composite of both that are irised in and out as needed. It can be a lot to handle at first, but if you've watched some of my more serious videos in the past, then you already know that I have a special affection for artistically innovative, original work that makes it easy for different audiences to engage with it. Yes, the visuals here are very different from most things out there, but Hertzfeldt doesn't waste any time showcasing just how funny and endearing this story is. We're just about ready to get into the meat of things, but here's one last thing that I would like to say first. Well, I guess a couple of things. First, I think there's a great deal of value in experiencing a lot of this story blind, so I'm going to try very hard to not spoil any major plot points. In fact, I'm planning to only use footage from part 1, which I think is still available in its entirety on YouTube. I'll have to check on that. And second, I know that the title of this video is sort of exaggerated and YouTubey, but for real, this movie is intensely emotional. I still think everyone should watch it, but you know you best, so if you don't think that you can handle that kind of thing right now, maybe give it some time. Okay, great. Now we can take a dip in the meat pool. Animation fans love the visual aspect of animation. In fact, the medium is primarily visual. And when we look at some of the most famousest animated movies of all time, they tend to be very lush and intricate and beautiful. And the leading animation studios seem to be in an arms race to create the most pleasant and technically impressive visuals possible. And at least on the visual side, we could easily call these movies maximalist. It's Such a Beautiful Day doesn't fit these descriptions. Visually interesting, sure, and there are definitely some excellent moments of character animation that enhance the tone, but on the whole, this movie is minimalist. Let's face it, these characters are stick figures, and for most of the movie, the animated elements don't even have color, and when they do have color, the execution isn't exactly mind-blowing. So if the animation in this animated movie isn't that technically impressive, why do people lose their socks over it? Well, the animation is kind of a big flashing arrow pointing to what is special about the movie. The tone, the writing, and the incredible use of subtlety. All of these contribute to a stunning level of emotional impact that will indeed break your heart in the best way possible, but we haven't gotten quite there yet. Let's go through some of the ingredients first. To me, It's Such a Beautiful Day is a triumph of excellent writing. We get lots of diegetic sounds and even some dialogue from non-existent creatures, but we never hear Bill or any of the other human characters speak. The story is told through visuals and ever-present narration provided by Hertzfeldt himself. Already, this movie is lacking so many of the pieces that make up animated classics. It doesn't have beautiful backgrounds, it doesn't have a straightforward and compelling premise, and it doesn't even have much voice acting. Technically, it doesn't have a clear story catalyst, not in the traditional sense. But the writing, the narration, it just delivers everything we need and more. In a tonal sense, this is an incredibly quiet movie. We rarely see Bill emote, but as we learn more about him, he becomes lovable and sympathetic to an impressive degree. He receives a lot of development, but remains relatable, mostly through the general mundanity of his day-to-day life. Remember that scene in Adaptation where Charlie Kaufman's insert character attends a screenwriting seminar and argues with a fake Robert McKee about how there should be movies that aren't about just exciting events, but instead what real people actually experience? It's Such a Beautiful Day pulls that off, while also still including plenty of motivation and story momentum. The pacing is relatively slow, but even if you tend to be bothered by that kind of thing, it's really not such a big deal because the movie is barely over an hour long. Also, the story picks up quite a bit towards the end, so there's no real danger of getting bored once you've moved through part 1. The writing isn't flashy either. The perspective is pinned to Bill, more or less, and the only times where it goes off the rails are when Bill does. You won't find too many creative descriptions or comparisons in the narration, and that's because a lot of the deeper elements are the result of how everything combines, which includes how you, the viewer, engage with the movie. Hertzfeldt does an excellent job of implying a lot of depth of thought and emotional impact rather than forcing it in explicitly. Yes, there are definitely scenes that present complex ideas, but in so many cases, that depth and impact is something that I'm bringing to the movie, even though the spark itself was definitely in the movie on the surface level. That's a little bit complicated to explain. Okay, I'm going to use an example from part 2 that's a bit of a spoiler, so I'll just refer to it in a way where it hopefully doesn't actually spoil the story beat. At one point, Bill remembers some handwritten notes, and a while later, he sees that person's handwriting and those notes from a different perspective. This remains one of my favorite moments in the whole movie, and just about every time I see it, even out of context, I start to tear up immediately. Now, the movie doesn't come right out and tell you why this is heartbreaking, but it does make it very easy to figure it out, especially because the movie gives you plenty of time to think. Moments like this get to breathe. This is sort of a stretch, but it reminds me of the first time I realized that many figurative paintings don't actually contain all the detail you think they do. Instead, they just imply a large amount of detail using skillful techniques. The art majors in the room are probably rolling their eyes, but for someone who wasn't trained in the visual arts, this was a big revelation for me. When you get up real close to a figurative painting, shadows and creases start to break down into the strokes that make them up. Most details are simply implied. It's Such a Beautiful Day uses this technique to perfection, which actually makes the storytelling more efficient in the process. Instead of laying out a ton of details and lore that might help us connect some of these dots, our brains end up doing the work automatically, and the same process applies beyond literal readings of the film. Based on our experiences and what we're bringing to the table, we can each interpret this movie very differently, especially when we move past the surface level story. I think this is particularly relevant to Bill's relationship to family members and other loved ones. These ancillary characters are never characterized really or developed much at all. According to the screenwriting handbook, that's bad. Every character that plays an important role in the story should feel fleshed out and believable, but that's not the case here. Because of this relative lack of detail, we naturally fill in so many of the empty spaces, which is massively effective with regards to Bill's loved ones. No matter who you are, regardless of your situation, you have strong feelings toward people close to you, whether they're positive or negative feelings or some kind of soupy mess in between those extremes. So when the movie has Bill responding to these characters, we as viewers are sort of also responding to similar people in our own lives, which is a very reliable way to get viewers emotionally invested in a narrative. And the movie gets to achieve this without ever feeling cloying or clumsy. It never hits you over the head with its emotional tone. It never pulls cheap tricks to make you feel sympathetic toward Bill. He's ordinary after all. We don't see him rescuing a kitten from a burning dumpster. He's just Bill. He's just a person doing his best, and that's exactly why he's sympathetic. The movie is subtle, and it's a wonderful showcase for how powerful subtle can be. It takes you off guard, and by the time the movie shifts into sixth gear about halfway through part 3, it's extremely difficult to look away from the screen. The hooks are in, and it's gonna take you where it's gonna take you. And that ending... Okay, so it's not entirely new, and there is a precedent for this type of ending in literary fiction, but even naming that technique here would be a bit of a spoiler. Still though, it's basically the best possible ending to this kind of story. It's creative and different and just so unique compared to the rest of the movie. I'll describe it this way. The ending is extensive, and I guess I mean that in a couple different ways. It's tempting to try and summarize why It's Such a Beautiful Day ends up working so well, but there are so many different elements contributing to the experience of watching it that I don't think summarization would be useful. Here's a summary. The movie works as well as it does because each individual element that makes it up does a lot of work to create the overall effect. See, not especially insightful. And that overall effect is the best evidence I have for why I rant so much about the importance of taking new approaches to creating media, from visuals to writing to story structure and all the rest. When we throw new ingredients into the pot, something different comes out, and there's a chance that that something will hold great value. It's such a beautiful day. Share some ingredients with some other pieces of media we love, but it adds so much more. The result is easily one of the most memorable movie experiences I've had, and I can all but guarantee that you'll feel the same way, even if you don't end up liking it. It's like visiting a new town. You're there for a while, you get some food, you might have a bad time, you get a parking ticket, or you might see a whole new life for yourself there. No matter what happened to you in that town, it's going to stay with you for as long as the images and the feeling swim around in your memory. To switch metaphors, it's a scar. Even if you forget it's there most of the time, it's just part of who you are now. So anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed the first video of Water Park Madness Month here on GL. Don't forget to comment your favorite water slide of all time in the comments below to enter the 5 Flags ticket giveaway. Runners-up get a free VHS videotape, continental US only. Until next time, keep on sliding.